Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here, and in today's video we have a very exciting guest with us. It is the most requested guest from our ask around from Who Should We Interview on YouTube, and it's Andrew Price, the Blender Guru. Hi Andrew.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for requesting me, I guess.
Yeah, it was pretty sort of like unanimous when we asked sort of like the community around who should we actually talk to. I think most people were like, well, Andrew for the lulz, but it's I think it's just because we've been moving more and more into Blender now as well, so people were pretty excited to at least have you on and hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and a huge congrats on reaching 1 million subs on your channel. That's amazing.
Thank you. Happened a couple of days ago. My mom was more into it than me, I think. Like, she was like sending me like updates, like it's almost there, it's like
Nice.
1,000 away. I'm like, oh no, I didn't know that. Yeah. But
I guess eventually,
cool.
Big numbers just become like they're just numbers, and like there's not that big of a difference from 998,000 to 1 million. It's just sort of like, I guess psychologically, there's like, oh my god, 1 million.
Yeah, and I don't know how much subscribers. I have a theory with YouTube that subscribers were necessary when YouTube started because there was no recommendation algorithm or whatever. But like, yeah, so you had to subscribe in order to tell YouTube, like, yeah, show me more of that video. But now YouTube knows what you want to watch better than you do. So you, like, sometimes I even forget that I'm not subscribed to a channel because I keep getting their videos regardless because it knows based on my watch history that it's going to get it. So like, the subscriber count is like still the figure that everyone uses as to like the size of a channel, but it's still like doesn't mean as much as it used to. So anyways,
I think there's like maybe there's like some psychological effect in it. I know that YouTube puts less emphasis on it. They also try to hide it now. But I still think there's like, people see, oh my god, they have 1 million subscribers. That must be legit content. Otherwise 1 million other people wouldn't have subscribed to it. But I definitely think YouTube puts less emphasis on it now.
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar with Andrew, let's give a quick introduction to what you're doing. So Andrew has been running Blender Guru now for, how long have you been doing it? 10 years?
Yeah, too long, 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're running your own company. Can you tell us just quickly a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's called Polygon. For all your texture needs. So basically, I started Polygon 3 years ago because, I wasn't happy with the existing textures that you could find online and how you had to, like, this was back when no one offered maps, like normal maps, displacement maps, all that kind of thing. And so I thought, why not just have a site where it's like textures, but it has all those maps included. So that was the basics of it. And yeah, so now we're, getting into all sorts of stuff, substance files and models and photo scans, and it's all very exciting. But yeah, Polygon, it's, you can check it out at Poliigon if you haven't already heard of it.
Nice.
Yeah, you all should.
Yeah, I mean, it's been growing steadily over the last, how long have you been doing it now? Is it like 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years. 3 years, I think. Yeah, 3.5 years since we started it in April. Yeah,
nice.
Of that year.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So we were thinking in this chat here, we would just talk to the Blender Guru himself about Blender. There's been so much happening over the last few years, in particular now with the 2.8 version coming out. It's really interesting, like just hearing like your perspective of, cool, Blender is awesome now. Where do we go from here? Like where do we actually take, like, where's Blender heading from here on? And one of the key things here is it just got a lot of extra funding, like through Ubisoft, Nvidia, AMD, and Nvidia are fighting between who can do the most funding.
Yeah,
bunch of millions of dollars heading into this. So where do you think this is leading? What are you going to do with all the millions they have now?
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it happened, and I don't know specifically. I mean, it was obviously 2.8 was part of it, but I'd be interested to know what specifically it was that made all the companies go like, oh, let's go now. Like Blender's been there, like I've been using it for over 10 years, like 12 years, 12, 13 years. And it was always this fringe thing. It was like, it used to be the butt of the joke of like the industry's doing their stuff. There's Max and there's Maya and Lightwave and Softimage, right? There was all those, and they're doing their stuff, and then there's Blender, and it's just like kicking a can down a road. Like, what's it doing? I don't know. And then it's just got all this funding from all these companies, and they just like one after the other, stacking on, and I'm like, what is going on? It's fantastic, obviously, but it's like, I'd be interested to know what it specifically was that they saw at their end that triggered it. I don't know. But what are they going to do with the money? That's a good question. Like something, so Ton said part of it, or at least one of the initial grants, was going to be used for operations, which is something that has been needed, like to scale up from, where you are with like, I don't know, let's say a dozen developers, to scale up to like 30 to 50. Anyone who's run a company knows that there are problems you have here that aren't problems here, but there are now more problems here that are different problems. So like in a company, that's why they say you need a CEO to take you from 30 people to 300 people, that somebody has done that previously, because there's a lot of unique challenges that come in that space. So I think Blender has that. Like it's got like this small ragtag team of developers, of volunteers and things like that, but it was kind of getting a little crippled under the weight of like managing everything. And so I imagine, and I would hope, that some of that money is going to be used to hire an experienced person to lead operations, lead development. Basically, you need like a CPO, Chief Product Officer, somebody to, essentially like look at what developers are doing, set dev sprints, set goals, set deadlines, and then do what you can to actually reach them. That's what I would really love to see. And then other than that, I would also hope that they would use it for, you didn't ask what I would hope they would use it for, but I'll tell you, I would hope that they would use it for doing research within the 3D industry to find out what's on the horizon, where's the industry going to be in 5 to 10 years, what are the key problems that Blender has today, what can be solved, what can't be solved, what are some things that we need to build, what are some things we need to let go of, like basically thinking more like a commercial company, which the words commercial in Blender sounds like hearsay, and people get very antsy at anything suggesting that a corporate company might know some things, but they generally do, So I would hope that Blender would do this sort of research, and like, proceduralism, like that's pretty big. That's not disappearing. It's going to ramp up. I think that software like Substance and Houdini, those took off because the industry needs them. Like the game industry needs, in order to make bigger infinite worlds, it can't build them by hand. It needs to be created procedurally. And Blender kind of lacks in that area pretty severely right now. So I would hope they would use part of that to like procedural stuff or whatever else is needed, video tracking, camera tracking if that needs an improvement, or the video sequence editor, whatever it is that is smart for the community. I'd hope they'd kind of throw money at big problems that can't be solved by volunteers. So that was a long answer, but
I mean, we see like a lot of the stuff we see whenever we do a Blender video is people talking about sort of like the feature is set, the suite that Blender is. Like Blender can do everything. Do you think it's sort of the goal with Blender and moving it forward, especially with the amount of funding that they're getting now, is that they're trying not to overtake, but sort of like become part of the commercial market, like come in and compete with Maya, come in and compete with Max or Cinema 4D? Is that sort of like the road they're heading? Because I've heard before that Blender is its own thing and it always wants to be its own thing. Like the industry does this, but Blender wants to do it its own way. But like, at least from our perspective, I think it's like, well, if you want to be part of an industry that has a set of rules and this is how we work, you still have to conform in some way to that. You can't just go, well, I just want to do my own thing and get into the industry.
Yeah. I totally agree. So there was, I can't remember when Ton said it, but Ton said Blender is for Blender users once, and that was not ridicule, but people were like, what? Really? Blender is for Blender users? What does that mean? It sounds like you're kind of giving your finger to anyone who says Blender could improve to look more like Max or Maya, So I think there's a good point there in that the industry, like just because something is industry standard doesn't automatically make it the right way.
No,
right?
no, definitely.
For example, ZBrush. A lot of things that ZBrush does in its sculpting workflow makes no sense and should absolutely be thrown out. I'm sure you guys know much more about it than I do, but my limited experience is that ZBrush has succeeded despite so many things that should have guaranteed its failure.
Yeah, but like you can, because like we've made tons of videos ranting about the horrible user experience, pipeline integration with ZBrush, but the advantage that ZBrush kind of had was like in terms of competition, like ZBrush was kind of the first. Yeah, you have 3D code on the side, which is also kind of like a fringe software. You have Modbox, which never really got any updates after like the first couple of years. So I think ZBrush kind of just won by default there, and then people were like, oh wow, I mean the sculpting's pretty good in this, so we'll just continue to use that. Whereas the challenge is that I feel Blender faces is that there's a lot of 3D software out there that solves a lot of the same problems. So like in order for it to come in and be a viable option for companies, it's like it's not that it has to do something different, it just has to like I'm just not entirely sure where it can go, like what does it need to offer in order to get there.
Yeah, I totally agree. In a way, it's surprising that Blender has done as well as it has when you consider how much money Autodesk has. It's pretty crazy that. But here's the thing: I don't think that. I was looking at Autodesk financials, and like the entertainment division, which is Max and Maya, makes up such a small percentage of their revenue, and I think it was like less than 5%, 10%, something like that. Like it's almost entirely AutoCAD and like the industrial design, manufacturing industries that make up the bread and butter of Autodesk. So I kind of don't blame them for just like resting on their laurels, which is perhaps how Blender was able to rise amongst it, because it's like any development was better than none in the industry. But like you guys saw the Houdini 18 release video.
It looks fantastic.
Like Houdini does this every year. Like every year there's a new release. Like it blows my mind every year.
Yeah, exactly. They are just like doing everything right. They are going hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I would see as more of a question of like, could Blender compete with Max and Maya? Yeah, probably. I think it already is winning in a lot of ways. Could it compete with Houdini? I don't know. Those guys are just doing everything the right way.
Yeah.
And they seem to be... They also have that geeky side of like doing things correctly. I feel like the way things are built is like kind of nerdy and like programmer style, which is what Blender's really based off of. Well, as like it started out as like just programmer friendly, like who cares about the user experience, and it was horrible when I started using it. And that was always the defense, like, oh, it was, it's made by developers, and like you got to go through this hazing ritual, this ring of fire in order to learn Blender, right? And people said that it was better off for it because it was like, built to do things better or whatever. But like Houdini's got that to like 10x. Yeah. I just feel like the Houdini workflow, I feel like whenever I see one of their videos, I'm like cracking open a portal and like looking 10 years into the future of the industry. It's like, that's where 3D software is going to be in 10 years from now.
Yeah, but that's why we've given people the advice that like, hey, I want to get into the industry, or how should I prepare for it? A lot of the times what we talk about is you should probably start looking into Houdini. It doesn't matter it basically doesn't matter which part of the pipeline you're in. There's always things you can procedurally do in Houdini to optimize your workflow. And I know a lot of the studios out there, like especially the bigger studios, they look for people with Houdini experience, because most of the time they can, like even if you're a texture artist, okay, you just plug in something that you made in Substance and then you make it even better in Houdini. So there's a lot of need for that.
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous if Blender is, or the people who's taking the future of Blender seriously here, if they're trying to defeat Houdini, like we're talking about, right? They can probably get into, they could probably convert a lot of Max and Maya users, Modo users, and all that, because there's so much overlap. A lot of that is basic asset creation, do UV mapping, do some simple animation, light render it out, and all that. But the moment you're talking about effects, like you're not beating Houdini, like you're not beating like 10% of Houdini. It literally has a 20 years leap ahead of it. Sure, you can set fire to donuts and monkey heads and all that kind of stuff in Blender, but that's not effects. That's like the tip of effects.
Yeah.
If you want to really go into that, it's not about can you set fire to this monkey head. It's can you specifically art direct every single particle in an incredibly optimized way, and can you export this back and forth between Katana and Modo and whatever software it is you want to use.
Yeah.
So I think it's really dangerous if you're trying to push Blender into a direction where you're competing against something like that. Like then you're jumping into an ocean full of sharks, and it's a very tiny software for that.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I don't actually think Ton wants to compete with Houdini. I don't even think he's used the term compete. I don't. He sees what Blender's doing as separate to the industry, which is odd because there's also this celebration of new users and always making fun of Macs and all that kind of thing. So it's like they do definitely have their eye on the industry, and they love it when it's succeeding and there's more studios using it. But also they don't care if Blender isn't doing something that the other people in the industry are. So I think like it's kind of the key problem with open source projects is it's like the reason that simulations aren't as good in Blender as Houdini is there isn't anybody that enthusiastic about it to work on it. Like Blender got smoke simulations like 2009. And I mean, it has improved. Maybe it's got a little bit of multi-threading perhaps. I think it got that wavelet kind of thing added to it so you can add more detail. But beyond that, not much, right? Just not much. Whereas Houdini is just like everything. It'll do everything. So why has that happened? Well, there hasn't been anyone, I think, interested in it. And if you asked Ton this, like, why isn't the smoke simulation improved? He would say, well, somebody needs to do it. Which is frustrating when you're used to, as a user, talking to the owner of a software and presenting ideas of like, we need to fix this thing, get your team on it, and it's like, well, it's a community thing. Who wants to develop it? It's like, I don't know, I'm not a developer. So it requires, and I'm not saying it's wrong. It's like it's open source. That's the way things are. But it is. I don't know where I'm going with this point.
Yeah, but
anyways,
I get it because it's actually something that Henning and I talked about for a bit, where we were talking about different implementations of things, and like, okay, Blender has support for cryptomats, which just seems random. It's like, okay, of all things, there's cryptomats. I mean, cryptomats are amazing, but then you look at something like Alembic support. Well, there's only a specific subset of Alembic settings that are actually implemented in Blender. Well, that was because a company needed Alembic support, and they just developed what they needed and gave the rest to the community. And there you end up with a feature that's not fully fleshed out for, the masses, but it's still implemented in Blender. And therefore, when you have these sort of, I'm not going to call them half-assed solutions, because this solution was perfect for whatever company was using it, but you end up with maybe some incomplete solutions that reflect worse on it than it really should, where it's like, well, it technically has Alembic support, it's just not very good.
Yeah, if Maya were to develop Alembic, but when they did it, they were thinking about how can this be used in every single scenario, and you would QA it just like crazy. Does this work in? Can you unhide? Can you import from every single software and everything there? Well, the implementation of Blender might be this worked in exactly what we needed.
Yeah.
Let's just get that into the software. And that's a lot better than not having anything at all.
Of course.
But it's also very frustrating when you kind of rely on the feature and now you suddenly, oh crap, it can do half of what you actually thought it could do. Because if you look at something like that, like it's a boring topic, right? Alembic support, who cares? You care if you're moving data between software. And then if you see that Maya has it, cool, and Blender has it, awesome. Now you just assume it's the same implementation, but in reality it's like night and day between the two.
Yeah.
But it's not like you can't really fault Blender for it, because then now you're criticizing the Alembic support, which is not great, but the comparison would be if you didn't have it, you wouldn't criticize it.
Yeah.
So it's like it's better than not having it, but because of it, you give it more shit for it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, and because there's also the argument to make that actually having a crappy feature is worse than having no feature.
Yeah.
Which is a point to be made. Yeah, I don't know. This is I guess it's getting into like product strategy, and like this is the kind of thing that like a product officer is good at, you know.
Yeah.
Head of product. Blender, the software is the product. How do you make it the best for its users? And yeah, it's a little open in the air. As for the like corporations developing features, Cryptomat was actually another one, developed by Tangent Animation for their film. What was the name of that film?
Was that a Netflix one?
The Netflix one. What was it called?
Yeah, I can't
Next
remember.
Gen, I think it was called. Next Gen, yeah.
Okay.
So they made Cryptomat for that, which is why that one's in there. And I guess Alembic as well. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have, unfortunately, like a lot to say about it, because, I mean, I don't know a terrible amount of, like... Because, like, everything I want to say about it is, like, Blender shouldn't be succeeding with the way it's going about it, but it is, right? Like, just kind of like a hodgepodge of ideas. Like it's open, literally. It's open source, and anyone can contribute. And I don't know how that works. Like, how do you even stop somebody from just like adding crap into it if it's an open code base? I don't know. It's just like out in the open. So the only things that I can ever say about it is like from a user point of view, as if I was criticizing it, like as if I was subscribed to an Adobe suite, I would say this. I would say they need to put money here. They need to develop this. They need to, you know, crack the heads of the developers and say, what are you doing? You know, but it's like, no, it's an open source project. So it's like, you should fix it. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, because it's an open source project, like, you know, we've just collectively agreed that the Blender Foundation organization, they are the ones that like, they're the central figures that control whatever gets distributed. Because it's open source, like, okay, worst case scenario, what could happen is like someone forks off Blender because it's open source. They decide to set up their own company, Blender Not Foundation, and then they continued from there. Okay, people like Blender Not Foundation better, and therefore they start supporting that. You know, that is also like, that's the nature of open source. We've just all sort of like collectively agreed that the Blender people, they're the ones that they have the Blender's best interest at heart, basically. So
yes,
it's like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. The whole forking thing. I actually I looked into that once because back in 2011, no, 12, 13, something like that. I put together this big campaign about how crappy the user interface was for Blender and how it just did everything backwards for no reason. I made this video called Why It's Broken or something like that. It was like a 2-part series, no, 3 parts, and then the third part was I made a user mock-up of what I imagined the interface would be. And it was this huge storm of just angry comments online, just like from people that both like fighting each other, people that agreed with it, and then people that hated it and thought that Blender should be the way it was. And I was looking at, because I was so frustrated with the discussion of some key developers who I thought were making some very crucial mistakes, and despite best discussions, it just wasn't happening. So I was looking at like, how can you could fork Blender. You could fork Blender. I was like, you could fork it. I could make my own Blender. And then, I spoke to a developer, and he was very strongly advising me not to do that. Which is a good thing, because that would have just been a nightmare. I wouldn't have started Polygon. I wouldn't have had Blender Guru channel. I would have spent all my time trying to prove somebody wrong.
Just be angry in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, but yeah, you could. Yeah, if you're not happy with Blender development, you can take it and go Blender, whatever, the next Blender. Come up with your own name. Just like here's the thing. I don't know much about open source, but like there's the Linux world. Right? There's all the different Linux distributions. I guess there could be in the future several Blender distributions.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally a possibility, especially with more and more companies coming on board. Like I could see, like with Ubisoft, for example, them using it for their little animation department. Like that's going to be a fork for them. Like they're going to fork it off in a way that like they customize a lot of things, make sure that it works, and then obviously they're going to give some back to the community. But like I would imagine that's sort of like a fork for them where they can try and implement some things that get pushed out, but they probably want more control over everything in Blender, I would assume.
Oh, right. You think that you reckon that Ubisoft would be making a fork?
Yeah, not a publicly available one, but something that they have more control over in their environment. Because like, I mean, you need. It doesn't have to be like, okay, it's officially forked off. It's just like this is the version that we're running with, and then occasionally I think they're gonna take in updates that has been pushed out from Blender.
At least if you're going into like the bigger like in a bigger pipeline there, like at least in all the big VFX studios, the version you're seeing of Maya can be quite different from what you have. For modeling, it's still very vanilla, but there are so many tools you just need in terms of pipeline and just features which aren't needed. New deformers, you have new modeling tools, new UV tools, whatever it might be. So it's like if Maya was open source, all the big studios would have forked the living crap out of it like years ago and just kept on using that.
Oh yeah, right.
Because you just need so many things and you need them right now. You can't wait for like a 3-month version of it. It's way quicker just to have your R&D department just whip up some quick C++ or whatever programming. I don't know.
Yeah. Which I guess actually kind of makes sense. Yeah, why some companies are now throwing money at Blender? Because if I would imagine that what you just explained, like with Maya being, if you're restricted to a closed source system and you need so many things that it doesn't have, you just have to, the companies would be losing money on all these workarounds, when if you had open access to the code, you could fix it and save money for the company. So yeah, I guess if companies can finally see Blender as like, we could actually do stuff with this, the open platform. Because I don't know much about the studio life and like how much individual hackery goes on. You guys would know a lot more. Like, how was it?
There's a lot of individual hackery.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at Maya in production, it's still the skin Maya, but like the suite of tools that they've developed for it. I mean, you have complete applications that run inside of Maya. Like something, let's say shot sculpting, for example, which is where you make animation, you have your simulation on top of everything, then you need someone to shot sculpt it to correct whatever intersections that are there. Like it's very common for studios to have a shot sculpting tool, and a lot of the times that's a full application that's running inside of Maya using the Maya libraries. Like it's running in the viewport, it's using the Maya sculpt brushes and the soft select tools to sort of like tweak things. Whereas I think if it was open source, you'd have a better access, because like the APIs don't give you access to everything necessarily, so some things are restricted.
It's also why it's a nightmare for studios to actually upgrade the versions as well. Like we were talking about this, and why isn't Blender industry standard yet? And one of the reasons is that the studios, this is not a Blender thing, but the studios, they never update the latest version, so you might be 2 versions behind. So just because 2.8 came out now, I would never ever use it in a big production, not yet, because it's been out for like, I don't know, 3 months or something. Like I would need to get stress test like crazy, and fixing all the little leaks here and there, like all the water going into the boat, because that's just the way it is with any software.
Yeah, I mean, what you do is you stick with the version of Maya that you start a production with when you start a film. That's the version that you end with. You have R&D coming in and developing specific tools for it, but you might be on the same Maya version for maybe 3 or 4 years, because even when you go to the next show, they might still feel like, well, we don't know how things perform in the next version of the software, so we'll stick to the version that we know, which can be frustrating because especially, I mean, Maya's development is pretty stagnant now in terms of features. They're mostly looking at optimization, but when they were...
What about Bifrost? That's pretty big, isn't it?
Yeah, that's awesome. There are a few huge new features which are coming in. I'm not sure how much of this is developed and how much of this is software they've bought and kind of thrown into it, because that's where you've seen a lot of stuff when it comes to the big software.
Yeah.
Like they're not natively developing it. They are using the power of the purse and then throwing it in there, which is something that obviously like Blender can't do. You can't just buy a software and steal their features. You can't just, like, Blender couldn't buy Substance and then just start to scavenge those features.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I thought Bifrost was it looks like Houdini inside Maya, like a procedural modeling and effects tools. I don't know if you guys have played much with.
I
don't know.
Bifrost as well for the new motion graphics tools. Do you know?
I don't actually know, but I know a lot of riggers are looking into it as well. Riggers, effects.
I mean, there's just a lot of fluid sim stuff being shown with Bifrost. But it was like, I think they pushed it out like a couple of years ago. Like the last couple of years, as far as I'm aware, like Maya hasn't really received that big upgrades. It's mostly performance, like animation and making it faster. But yeah, Bifrost was pretty cool. I haven't played around with it, but it looks pretty awesome. I think like to bring back to what you were asking about before, Andrew, like why are the companies interested in Blender like right now? And I think one of the big things is honestly 2.8. This is really what put it on our radar. You know, we've been trying it beforehand, and then you open it up and you can't do anything in like first 30 minutes. Do I right click or do I left click?
Yeah, it's been such a frustrating experience where obviously you should spend more time and getting into it. But when you first experience, it's just rage. Yeah. If you open up Cinema 4D, for instance, you're probably going to be able to start navigating and working with stuff right away. But in Blender, it was just rage. But now with 2.8, for me, 2.8 is mostly like a UX upgrade, mostly like a user experience one. Of course, there are a lot of new features here and there, but it's just so much easier to use. Yeah, and I think this has been a big hurdle for it up to this point. So now that it's a lot easier to use and more people coming into the field, I think it can become a pretty serious tool for a lot of smaller studios and particularly freelancers. Yeah, like if you're a freelancer today and you're spending a lot of money just to have Maya as a modeling tool, I mean Blender can do basically just as good job there. So I think 2.8 has been a huge leap up for it. What do you think about that, Andrew? Like how has 2.8 been? How has 2.8 pushed Blender forward?
Yeah, I can definitely notice the left and right click, that being a huge one, which by the way was like a key point that I put years ago in my Blender's UI is terrible presentation. I even did like a survey at the end. I was like, who here agrees Blender should be left click select? And it was 90%. Should be left. But then development was still like, nah. And then I got like really mad. I was like, come on, it's a no-brainer, But anyways, I think that is definitely a part in just like that, as you said, like that hurdle, like stepping into a restaurant, like tripping over a step. It's like, who put the step there? I'm out. It's like just a frustrating experience. They just removed the step. So it's like, oh, that's nice. It's a little smoother. I think the hotkeys, like that was terrible as well. Everything was hotkey based. You had to like almost like learn how to play the piano to like figure out where how to do this, how to do that. Yeah. Whereas now at least there's these simple transform, rotate, scale, those tools, as well as when you're in modeling, there's all the tools there in the toolbar. That's probably helped as well. I think workflows, the little tabs, that probably helps it look more like a professional application. And then, I think probably the Eevee rendering was probably a big part of it as well, because people kind of saw it now as like, it's kind of like Marmoset in free software that is like a full package. It's not just a renderer. So it's like that kind of probably tipped people over to like, okay, let's play around with this. So I think those parts, but again, like I don't have the industry experience, so from like my perspective, all I know is Blender, so I don't actually know what it is people are most thrilled about. I can only speculate, but I don't know. In you guys, when you opened up Blender for this 2.8 version for the first time, like what was it that surprised you in a good way, and then also jumping off that, what were you surprised that it didn't have or features it was lacking?
Well, it's like, I think, because I used Blender for a little bit when it was still 2.7.9. Maybe it was 2.7.8. I don't know. It's many years ago. But I mostly used it for UVing because the UV tools there were actually better than the ones in Maya. But then I completely sort of like forgot about it again. And then once 2.8 came out, it just looked refreshing. Like for me, it sounds horrible to say as well, but like, so much of the user experience for me when I use software, like if I buy software, like for my Mac or something, I most of the time buy it based on what it looks like. I mean, yeah, features are important as well, but I'm very visual. So it's like if it looks bad, which I think the previous versions of Blender did, I don't think it looked good. Like the viewport shading, you could probably customize and all that, but just like from the outside, I didn't feel like it looked good. So that was very off-putting for me.
Interesting.
And then in terms of like
very superficial,
very superficial, yeah. But then getting into Blender, like with 2.8 now, the fact that there are menus, it's like sort of like the 3D software that I've been used to using, that made the transition a lot easier for me and just a lot more enjoyable. But I am curious sort of in terms of how it's actually changed, because the more and more I've been using Blender, the more it still feels like a skin that was put on top of 7.9. Of course there's like a lot of changes, but I can't speak to specifically how does it feel like going from 2.7.9 to 2.8, having not used the previous version for many years. That's where I'm sort of like curious, what has it been like to transition to that?
Yeah, one thing I find very frustrating as well is that like it is still a bit like the learning to play the piano. Like it's a lot less hotkey based from what I can tell, but if you haven't used it for a little bit, you might start to forget how to actually use it, because there's so many things which are just intuitively hotkey based, where in other software a lot of things is in the interface. You can still find everything in the interface in Blender, but it's still made for hotkeys. Yeah. So if you haven't, particularly we've been pretty new to it, if you haven't used it for a few weeks, you're like, how the hell did I do the thing? And you kind of intuitively just like feel the keyboard now, like that was the case.
Yeah.
But in Maya, you just bring up like a marking menu and you just see where all the tools are. It's a lot easier for me to go back to Maya after 6 months than it will be in Blender, just because it's still like now I haven't played a piano for like 6 months now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like one of the arguments that I've seen a lot has been like Blender is a lot easier to learn compared to Maya or Max, and like I'm curious about that, because like we come into Blender trying to learn Blender with 13 years of experience in 3D, so it's like I used Max for like 4 or 5 years. I've used Maya for even more. I've used ZBrush for a long time as well, so I'm very familiar with the language of 3D, and I spent about a month full time almost just getting around Blender and seeing how many features that I could get into. And from my perspective, Blender is not easier to learn. It's as complicated as the other 3D softwares, because there's just as much in there. There's no sort of like it's more accessible because it's free, but I think in terms of complexity, it still ranks the same as any full suite 3D software for me.
And they all software also have their quirks as well.
Yeah.
Like when you come into Blender, you're like, oh man, there are many hotkeys here, and you come into and when you go from Max to Maya, you're like, where's the modifier stack?
Yeah.
Same if you were to go to Blender to Maya, you'd be like, where the hell is modifier stack? I gotta rethink the way I'm working now, because it's so different. So it's always tricky switching software, but I totally agree. I don't think at all it's an easier software to learn. It's just as frustrating as any other software, and that's just a fact. Like when you are learning new software, it's always frustrating. Like there is no way to go about that.
Yeah.
You can't make something intuitive just like by default. If you do that, then you're simplifying it too much, and you won't have the depth of the features.
Yeah.
But I felt the same as you, where it felt like first opening up, it felt like a very new software, like a very modern software. Then you start to look into it, and it feels like an old software, an old quirky software, for good and bad, but with a very modern skin assigned to it. But I think the feature I enjoy the most by far is Eevee. Because everything else you had in Blender is something we could already do, like all the modeling and all the kind of stuff. There was nothing I couldn't do in Maya in the same amount of speed.
Yeah, like the primary things that we do.
Exactly.
Obviously, there's a lot of features in Blender that we haven't seen in other software.
Exactly, but for me personally, the one thing I couldn't do in other software, that was Eevee, where you can model straight in like a real-time viewport, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
And that actually changed the way I'm working, and I'm realizing that Blender for me is probably the best concepting tool I've ever used because of Eevee, and then because of cycles as well in the viewport. You can just block things out so quickly. You have a plane, you throw in a displacement modifier, you throw some noise in there, suddenly you have an environment, and you can just quick change the cinematography of it right away. Change the lighting in a second, change the materials and all that. It doesn't have the depth of the software. Like if you need to be incredibly specific with your result, it doesn't offer that. But if you want to get up to like 60, 70, 80% really, really quickly, I don't think there is any other software out there which can do that, just because of Eevee. So that's probably the feature I enjoyed the most by far. Like just how intuitive it is to do like look development in it and come up with ideas.
Yeah.
But if you're comparing it like one-to-one with what we used to, where we have all the specificity and all the control and everything there, then it's very frustrating. But when I started considering it more as a concepting tool and like an idea creation tool, then it was like a switch going off in my head. And this also seems true with how other people see it as well. I know that Framestore, the art department, they're looking into using Blender more and more there because it's so intuitive. They're not looking for the specific light linking, make this light here affect only this object here. They're more like, can we have 30 different versions of this design in like a day, and we need to light it and shade it as well, and then send it off to 3D printing. For that, it's just, I don't think there is anything which is even remotely close. Like not even ZBrush, because you still have rendering in there. So
not even 3D.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what I would say was really interesting for me, just realizing just how good it is for idea creation.
Yeah, that's something that's been surprising for me too. Like just seeing the amount of concept art that you see on ArtStation that's using Blender now.
Yeah.
And there's like Courses and Gumroad and like these top concept artists that are using Blender, and it makes perfect sense when you think about it, because it's like for like concept artists don't need to do the really high end stuff. They are, in a way, they're using it as a basic jumping off point. So they're not going to care about a limbic system or a fancy simulation system or, in-depth sculpting tools. They just need to get like base formations as a because they get perspective for free as opposed to drawing it from hand. So it's like, it makes perfect sense. Just throw some blocks in there, throw some light in to see where the shadow falls, and then you're done. So I totally. And then also, it's free, which is very attractive to a concept artist who doesn't need a full feature set. They just need to do basic stuff. So it does make perfect sense to me. Yeah.
What's your, like, I'm curious, the transition for you, like going, because like obviously you used to Blender for a long time. Like what's been sort of like a seasoned veteran's perspective on transitioning from the previous version to this? I know you did a hugely popular video about like why Blender 2.8 was a big deal, but I'm curious, like from your perspective, like for you, how do you feel that it's been a nice change, or whatever kind of change it's been?
I think it was a little jarring when I first switched over, just because the interface had changed so much, and the hotkeys didn't work anymore for a lot of things.
Also different hotkeys.
What's that?
So there's like different hotkeys in 2.8 as well, like a lot of those.
Yeah, like for example, when you were modeling or you're doing something, W used to be a common hotkey, a random hotkey, but it was basically almost like a right-click menu. And that, of course, is now the actual right-click, as it should be. But still, today, I still hit that W key, and that W key now changes the selection type to be like circle or box or something. So you always hit it, and then you end up with this circle around your cursor, and you go, damn it. But other than that, like I remember it being a little jarring, and there were things that I didn't like just because they were different. And I had to remind myself that was the reason I didn't like them. Because I saw people online there was even like memes about it, like how hard it was to jump over to 2.8. And people said it was just hard and it was just difficult. And people were criticizing it, saying that that's obviously wrong. And I had to like jump in a couple of times and a couple of tweets and go like, why is it wrong though? If the answer is just it doesn't feel intuitive enough, it's probably just because you're used to the old method, which isn't a real reason. It's going to take you a week to familiarize yourself with it, and then the old way will seem the wrong way. So, I just, I expected that a new interface would have that hurdle. And within about a week, I was over it. And then jumping back to 2.79, because there were some things, because I was using the alpha version, so some things weren't in there yet. That was just a nightmare. Like I was just amazed at how I was able to bear with this terrible old system. So Yeah, and I had the same reactions you guys had. Like things just looked more polished.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like anti-aliasing or something. Like everything had this smooth feel to it. I got like a 4K monitor, so it's like everything was like crisp. The text and like the all these extra shading options, and like things were cleverly put in a menu where you'd want them to and hidden out of the way when they're not. Whereas previously it was just like everything was on display like a 747 cockpit, and it was just daunting. But yeah, like I had that reaction where it was just like things feel simple and nicer. So yeah, I cannot go back, and I'm glad it's made all the changes that it has for sure.
So definitely a change for the better. Well, that's good to hear, because like it's from our perspective, you know, we have like one data point, which is like, well, I mean, 2.8 works pretty great now. So yeah, it's good to hear. If you're looking for training or high quality assets, make sure to stop by the FlippedNormals marketplace. And if you're interested in supporting us by buying our merchandise, you can check that out in the description below.